During the Second World War, not every prisoner behind barbed wire was a soldier. Some were mothers, daughters, teachers, women who had left Europe years earlier, or who had simply married a man with the wrong passport. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, fear swept across the United States. If you want stories like this to reach more people, subscribe to WW2 Classified, give this video a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice helps keep history alive. The government began classifying residents of enemy nations as enemy aliens. Most Americans remember the internment of Japanese civilians. Few know that over 11,000 German nationals and German Americans were also detained. Among them, hundreds of women and children. They expected punishment. What many found instead was order. And sometimes, simple kindness. In early 1942, President Roosevelt authorized the Department of Justice and the Immigration and Naturalization Service to create a network of civilian internment camps. Unlike military POW compounds run by the Army, these were civil custody centers designed to detain people considered a potential risk because of nationality, association, or rumor. German women were brought there for many reasons. Some had husbands who were sailors on German ships stranded in U.S. ports. Others had donated to German charities before the war. A few had simply written the wrong words in a letter intercepted by censors. The INS camp at Seagoville, Texas, became one of the first such places. It was originally a women's federal prison, brick buildings, tall fences, watchtowers. By 1942, its inmates were no longer criminals, but mothers and daughters accused of loyalty to an enemy they barely knew. Another site, Crystal City, Texas, would become a family camp, a place where German, Italian, and Japanese families were reunited under guard, living side by side behind high wire. Officially, these were not POWs. Legally, they were civilian internees. But daily life felt much the same. Routines, curfews, searches, roll calls, and an ever-present sense of uncertainty. Seagoville held just over 600 internees at its peak. Within the walls stood dormitories, classrooms, a library of more than 3,000 books, and a modest hospital wing. To many new arrivals, the first impression was shock, not because of cruelty, but because of how orderly everything seemed. They had imagined brutal camps, hunger, cold. Instead, they found rows of clean bunks, running water, and a dining hall where the food was plain but decent. One former internee recalled, "When we arrived, we expected anger. Instead, the guards seemed almost indifferent, as if we were simply part of their job." Days followed a strict rhythm. 6 a.m. wake-up, roll call, breakfast, work duty, classes, inspection, lights out at 10. Women were assigned to the kitchen, laundry, or classrooms. Children attended English lessons taught by other internees. Evenings were spent reading or sewing. Sundays, church services, sometimes led by a priest or pastor brought in from Dallas. But this structure could not hide the deeper tension. Every letter in or out of the camp was censored. Whole paragraphs vanished under black ink. Family visits were rare. Rumors spread daily, deportations, prisoner exchanges, separations. The women never knew who might be gone the next morning. For them, the smallest human gesture carried immense meaning. A smile from a guard, a nurse who lingered a moment longer, the sound of a radio playing softly in the office next door. Among the hundreds held at Seagoville was Anna Wardeman, a young German immigrant who had been living in Texas with her husband and newborn baby. In 1942, federal agents arrived at her house before dawn. Her husband was taken first. Then, days later, Anna herself. She was transported to Seagoville. Her infant left with relatives under government supervision. For months, she wrote desperate letters asking for permission to see her child. Letters that vanished into bureaucratic silence. Finally, in 1944, she was transferred to Crystal City, the only family internment camp in the United States. There she was reunited with her husband and baby, now a toddler. Years later, she would recall that moment as both joyful and humiliating. We were happy to be together, even if it was behind fences. I realized that freedom and kindness could exist even in captivity. Her story survives today in the Texas Story Project archives, a fragment of a forgotten chapter of wartime America. Not every guard was kind, of course. Some were harsh, some indifferent. But many accounts describe moments of quiet humanity that surprised the internees. One example comes from a woman named Betty Scherer, a civilian employee who worked in a Texas POW compound. She later told journalists she believed that treating prisoners with respect was the best form of propaganda America ever had. Scherer recalled giving sick prisoners extra food, helping them write letters, and allowing them to listen to Christmas carols on the radio. Source: AARP Magazine, 2019. How this woman helped German prisoners love America. Other records show that some guards brought donated toys for children, shared newspapers, or arranged cultural events to ease the monotony. One internee remembered receiving soap scented with flowers, a small luxury that left her astonished. She had expected suspicion. Instead, she found decency. These simple gestures stood in stark contrast to the fear and propaganda outside the fences. While the wider world imagined enemies, inside the camps, people discovered that kindness could survive bureaucracy. Make no mistake, these were still prison camps. Freedom was limited. Fences were topped with barbed wire. Armed patrols circled day and night. Each camp had its own disciplinary rules. Pregnant women gave birth under guard. Mail and packages were censored or withheld. And though many internees were treated decently, they lived with the knowledge that their detention was not the result of a crime, but of suspicion and fear. Medical records from the Justice Department show outbreaks of measles and influenza, disciplinary reports for unauthorized singing after lights out, and lists of personal belongings, items returned when detainees were released: a watch, a wedding ring, a small prayer book. Some women were later exchanged for Americans trapped in Germany, a process called repatriation, which sent them back into a war-torn country they barely remembered. The contrast between the security of the camps and the destruction overseas was not lost on them. One diary entry read, "It is strange. Behind fences we are safe, while our friends in Germany hide from bombs." Across America, the U.S. Army operated over 500 POW camps for German soldiers. By 1945, nearly 500,000 Germans were held there. Their experiences provide a useful mirror to the women's internment. According to historian Arnold Kramer, author of Nazi Prisoners of War in America, most German POWs were treated according to the Geneva Convention, housed in barracks, paid a small wage, allowed to write home, and fed roughly the same rations as U.S. troops. Some even worked on farms or in factories and made friends with locals. These policies were partly moral, partly strategic. Washington hoped that humane treatment would encourage better behavior toward Allied POWs in Europe. It was within this atmosphere that the idea of decency, even toward the enemy, took root. For the German women, this same principle often defined their daily reality. They were not tortured. They were not starved. They were watched, questioned, restricted, but sometimes they were also treated with unexpected respect. Why are these women's voices almost absent from mainstream history? First, because their detention was civilian, not military. Their files were buried in Justice Department archives, not in the better-known Army records. Second, because many internees felt shame. After their release, they returned quietly to their neighborhoods, rarely speaking about what had happened. Some changed their names. Others destroyed letters and photographs. Third, because their experience did not fit the public narrative. In post-war America, the story was one of victory and liberation, not of internment and moral ambiguity. And finally, because the world had seen horrors far greater, Auschwitz, Hiroshima, Nanking. Against such atrocities, a Texas camp with clean beds seemed unworthy of mention. Yet these small humane moments, the guard offering a blanket, the nurse delivering medicine, reveal something essential about democracy in wartime. Now, even a nation gripped by fear can choose compassion. What does it mean to be shocked by kindness? For many of these German women, kindness was not grand or dramatic. It was the sight of order where they expected chaos. It was being addressed by name instead of number. It was a guard tipping his hat, a doctor treating them as patients, not prisoners. In their letters home, some described confusion. They could not reconcile America's generosity with the propaganda they had heard. They began to see their captors not as monsters, but as human beings. And that realization, perhaps, was America's quietest victory. Today, the grounds of Seagoville and Crystal City have been repurposed. Few physical traces remain. But the archives, the diaries, photographs, and testimonies, preserve the voices of those who lived there. Their astonishment at kindness reminds us that humanity is not a weakness. It is a strategy. German women in U.S. custody were not soldiers. They were witnesses to a lesser-known side of World War II, a side where order and compassion coexisted behind fences. If this story moved you, subscribe to WW2 Classified, turn on the notification bell, and join us in giving voice to the stories that have been silent for too long. All sources and historical references used in this documentary are listed below in the description. Check them out, verify them, and become part of continuing this research. Until next time, thank you for watching and for keeping history alive.